I'll just go ahead and kick this off. Welcome to everybody for this technical conference to discuss the two rules, the electrical interconnection rule and the electrical service reliability rule. Hopefully, this can just be an opportunity to have a good informal conversation and maybe all come to the same understanding of how we should interpret these rules, whether any amendments are appropriate, anything like that. So why don't we start with introductions, and then we'll just, we don't really have an agenda for the meeting, so hopefully we just have a conversation with those in the room. But we'll go around the table. My name's Thad LeVar with the Public Service Commission. Why don't we just go this way?
Nazir Abdullah with the Division of Public Utilities.
Patrick Griecu, Assistant Attorney General representing the division.
Nathaniel Johnson with the Utah Rural Electric Cooperative Association.
And Dave Clark with the Public Service Commission.
And John Harvey with the Public Service Commission as well.
Maureen Cranville with Public Service Commission.
Brenda Salter with the Division of Public Utilities.
Doug Wheelwright with the Division of Public Utilities.
Okay, and those are on the phone. If you're not muted and want to introduce yourselves, go ahead. And I still can't say that without staring at the ceiling. I need to break that habit.
On the old mics, yeah.
Well, they're still on the ceiling, but I don't need to look at them.
They're not gonna.
Dean Sellers, Moon Lake Electric Association.
Sorry, could you repeat that? We didn't quite hear it that well.
Use that. Dean Sellers, Moon Lake Electric Association.
And Jared Griffiths from Moon Lake as well.
Okay. Well, again, we don't necessarily have a plan for how this conversation should move forward. I know the divisions had conversations with you about this. We just want to make sure that if our rules are written the way they need to be, that they're being implemented the way they need to be, and if we need to consider amendments to them, we can, and hopefully we can just work through that. So that's about all I have. Unless we need to walk through the rules and what the rules actually say and do, but I think everybody in the room is already up to that point. If anyone would benefit from that, let us know and we can do a walkthrough. These rules were implemented roughly 11 to 13 years ago. The interconnection one is a couple of years older than the reliability one, but they were both implemented around 2009, 2011. So if anyone else has thoughts to jump in, or if you have anything that you wanted to talk to us about. Again, this is, we title this as a tech conference, but pretty informal. We're just hoping to all learn from each other.
Perfect. Well, that's helpful for me. Maybe I'll jump in. As I mentioned, I'm fairly new. I started back in February, and my predecessor Jeff Peterson moved over as general counsel of the Deseret Power, one of our members. The co-ops, maybe just kind of an overview of the co-ops in general. We have in Utah, we've got Deseret Power, which is our generation and transmission or wholesale provider of power, and then we have 8 distribution co-ops. Of the 8, only 3 are headquartered inside of Utah. So down south, you've got Dixie Power, Garcane Energy, and then Moon Lake that's on the call up in the Uinta Basin. The other 5 are out-of-state co-ops, and so as I mentioned, I started back in February, and I think timeline-wise, I think there was a notice sent out in May, and so I was still trying to figure out what was going on with my position, but immediately started to kind of look into it, look back through the dockets just to kind of get an idea of what the specific rules were, and I believe my predecessor Jeff Peterson had kind of responded to Chris Parker, Division of Public Utilities, just kind of mentioning that normally that these are some of the things that co-ops we don't view or things that really apply to us in a certain sense because of our governing authority, which are our board members, and so I started to kind of look back through the docket history, and I actually only found. I was hoping to get a little bit better background information on it, but I only found one filing on I think it was, I can't remember which rule it was. It was the 313-7, and that was all the way back in 2013. And so that's all I could find, kind of my chronological search, and which again is not I know that's not an issue as far as whether or not we should be reporting on this. It was just something that I found, and so I, looking at that, and then of course there's the Utah Code that because I was trying to figure out who do these rules apply to, who should they apply to in our kind of from our understanding, And we do have Utah code that talks about out-of-state distribution electric cooperatives where they're exempt from PSC jurisdiction. And so really, as I'm kind of narrowing it down, I saw that those 5 distribution co-ops that are headquartered out of the state, I kind of looked at this and thought, well, this really shouldn't apply to them at all. And then Deseret being a wholesale distribution one, some of the requirements didn't make sense because they look more at the distribution side of things. Additionally, Deseret does a lot of the reporting to FERC on reliability and issues such as that. And so really, looking at this, I saw that it really is Moon Lake, Garcane Energy, and then Dixie Power. And so what I did is I reached out to each of those co-ops and just asked them, hey, these are the rules. What are you guys doing in regards to with your governing authorities, with your boards, providing reports on these? And the 3 of them responded. Two got back to me over email. One of them, Colin Jack, he's the chief operating officer down at Dixie. It was a verbal conversation, but each of them indicated that they provide these reports on a regular basis to their board members. And so whether it's
Excuse me, Nathaniel, when you say these reports, do you mean they cover these subjects,
Correct.
reliability and interconnection standards, they cover them with their own governing authorities, is what you're telling us?
correct? And I've now attended each of their board meetings, and so in each of their board meetings, they're all different in how they run their board meetings because the co-ops themselves, the geographical areas they represent are different, but reliability is always something they report on a monthly basis. They talk about outages, they talk about some of the challenges that they're facing, supply chain. They get into a pretty extensive report to their board members about what they're looking at, and that's really on the reliability side. And then on the interconnection side, they'll talk about net metering, talk about how many new connection requests they have, how many are still pending. They'll on the power generation side, it's a little tricky because of those 3, so Garcane, Dixie, and Moon Lake, they have agreements with Deseret Power that's where they purchase their power from. So they really don't have, apart from having a very small solar on site at their buildings, they don't really have generation. It's all coming through Deseret. And so that's, I reached out to them, and Moon Lake's online if you guys want to get into any specifics about what they're specifically providing to their boards each month. And but I that's what I found out as I was talking with them. They're providing this, and again, it's on a monthly basis. So I kind of saw that it definitely meets or exceeds kind of what the rules are. I think the spirit of what the rules are looking at. The question is, should it be going to the Public Service Commission, or should it be going to the governing authority of the boards? And obviously, our side of things, we feel like it would be kind of duplicative to have it go to the Public Service Commission when it's being reported to our boards, and then just how the co-ops are set up in general, our general governance. That democratically elected board members that are there, if there are issues, they're kind of dealing with them. But so I don't know if kind of as the rules currently written, I would say plain language, it looks like it does apply to the co-ops. I don't think you can really argue against that just in how it's written. I think for whatever reasons they just haven't been submitting the reports. And I don't think there's anything malicious in why they haven't been submitting. I think it's just the reasons I've identified. They felt like it hasn't really applied to them. So.
Yeah, and as we've looked, there's not a great deal of record on what the reasoning was when the commission put these rules in place. It wasn't that long ago, but there's not a lot that really shows it. So hopefully we can have this conversation here. And this is probably a good time to turn to anybody from the division, because what I think we're boiling down to is there a policy reason that these rules should require these reports to come to the commission? The commission wrote these rules in 2009 and 2011 to do that, but is there a benefit to that? Or, so, I'll go ahead and go to you, Abdul Nasser. Sorry, Dr. Abdul, I'll be a little more formal.
I think we're on the same page. As we get the action reports from you guys, and we look at, and we talk to the cooperatives, we found out that we're not on the same page. We had the feeling like indirectly that they had to file something here. But there was a mixed feeling among them, thinking like, we don't need to. And that's why we asked for clarification from the commission as to what we should be doing. Our concern was not, we were not looking into whether these are beneficial or not. That's not something we looked at.
Okay.
Maybe going forward we will look at it. But our issue was a clarification for the cooperatives as to whether they should go ahead and file it, or whether there should be some modifications to the rules and whatever happens from there.
Sure.
That's what our intention.
Okay.
As we asked for the technical conference.
That helps to lay the groundwork.
Yeah.
Well, not to belabor things and also not to be too succinct, but that's probably where we are then, is whether we should
Yeah.
consider a rule change that would go along with what you've described of, if you have a governing body that's not the PSC, but your elected board that you're responsible to on all issues, including interconnection and reliability. Is there a policy reason for the PSC to have a rule in place that would require reporting to the PSC also?
Yeah, I'm not
So
hearing
we've
one.
got to come to that decision. It's probably a good time to evaluate this, and so both this conference or any public comment period we would have in the future would be an opportunity for anybody to weigh in if there's concerns with changing that. So, sorry,
No, thanks. This is Dave Clark for the people on the phone, and it seems to me that if we were to propose the change that would restrict the applicability of these rules to, for example, the Rocky Mountain Power and.
Utilities who are rate regulated.
Yeah,
products.
exactly, yeah. Then that would be an opportunity for the division, if you had if you identify any substantive reason for that change not to occur, you could provide us those comments in connection with the proposed change.
We were not looking at it in that light.
Right.
But going forward, we will look at it.
Yeah,
like
exactly,
that,
and then
advise you as
Yeah.
to where to go from here.
Yeah,
And we would appreciate you guys to jump on and let us know what you think. And
absolutely. But superficially, it seems at least that there's redundancy here that may not be necessary given the assurances we have that these important subjects are being covered by the co-ops in their reporting to those who have governance over them for rates and other matters.
Yeah, I mean, another way to say what you're saying is, if there's going to be a report required to the PSC, to what end? Because what would the PSC do with those reports,
Exactly.
considering our limits and our jurisdiction and everything else?
Yeah, that's right.
gotcha.
I mean, is there any,
Why don't you tell you?
oh, sorry, this is John Harvey with the commission. I'm just curious if there's any interaction between the co-ops and our major utility, Rocky Mountain Power, that these types of reports might illuminate that relationship at all? I don't know if you're long enough to know that, or if I need to get it from the guys on the phone.
Yeah, maybe Jared, Dean, if you guys would, if you can maybe elaborate on that as it pertains to Moon Lake, if reporting or
Well, and I guess to give a little bit of background, I mean, your systems and Rocky Mountain Power systems are interconnected at certain points. They'd have to be. Are those interconnections things that need to be monitored, or would there be a value to those being monitored by the Public Service Commission?
This is Jared. So I'm the engineering manager for Moon Lake Electric. We do, as members of Deseret, annually we put together kind of combine this data and submit it through an IRP process to WAPA. So they're definitely aware of all the a lot of this data anyways, as far as generation and so forth. If there's any sizable additional generation that's integrated into a system, then that's really coordinated with PacifiCorp and through the their market operator through the California ISO. I believe that's anything larger than 1 megawatt of generation. And I think that's what, as far as impact to each other, that's what we really care about, is anything that has a sizable impact. Some of these smaller aggregated, like net metering applications, so far we haven't seen issues where those have impacted other utilities. Once you get into the bigger several megawatt facilities, that can have some implications on each other, and that's what Representative Jack was working on here in this last session.
Thank you.
This is Abdul Nasser with the division. Just a question, a follow-up question. Given the fact that Rocky Mountain Power is reporting to the commission these things, would it be reasonable to think that they are filing or reporting about the interconnections, and that interconnection they are reporting includes your interconnection with that? So you reporting and then reporting is just redundancy. Can we think that way, or am I lost?
Yeah, so I don't know the whole kind of how ownership is all worked out, but a lot of times it's so Rocky Mountain Power owns a power plant. We own a certain interest in that. The municipals own a certain interest in that. But to my understanding, Rocky Mountain Power is the one that's providing that report because they're the majority, the owner in that facility. Transmission lines. So transmission line, and Jared, feel free to chime in as well. But I don't know of any transmission lines that Deseret would have that are kind of shared with Rocky Mountain Power. There's certain agreements in place that I think that kind of to your point. I think Rocky Mountain Power is providing the reports on those just because of their role and their ownership in that. But I can't think of anything specifically where our interconnections would mean that something is not. Because I think really the question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if something's falling through the gap. And I can't think of anything that would be falling through the gap because, again, we're either reporting to FERC, we're reporting for Deseret's side to WAPA, and then on the distribution level, to the governing authority.
Yeah, one other comment on that is, really, a lot of, as far as these like net meter type projects, those are integrated down on the distribution level. The bigger ones that are more impactful are integrated on the transmission level, and Deseret, or Rocky Mountain Power, and WAPA are very good about coordinating with each other as impacted entities once those larger generation projects are proposed. I know Moon Lake with Deseret, we've been on the phone with Rocky Mountain Power a couple times here this year to talk about some of those more major interconnections, loads, and certainly if there's any large generating facilities, then that will go through that process as well.
We want to make sure that any questions anybody has get asked here while we're all here in the room, so there's no rush. If anybody has other questions or things they'd like to understand better.
This annual conference is more for you guys to understand what the expectations are, and for us to understand why you were not filing what you were supposed to file. I mean, is there things we are not understanding? So that's the whole idea we're here for. So I think those guys who are on the phone, who were here for a longer period of time, could help us if, with that kind of concept. What your intention of participating in the technical conference? We were trying to understand what I just explained, and would like to understand what you were expecting out of this, so that this becomes more useful for all of us. And I'm looking at the camera.
I keep looking up too, so. Well, and if I can just comment on that too, so that's as part of my kind of investigation, reaching out to each of the distribution co-ops and even Deseret Power, trying to figure out kind of what the understanding was. I think Jeff Peterson, my predecessor, really articulated that best to Chris Parker, was that this was really something. I don't think there was any reason why any malicious intent behind not complying with the plain language of the rules. I think it was just quite simply. It's contrary to kind of what the governance and of the co-ops are. They provide these reports on a very regular basis, and so that's where to their governing authority, their boards, and so I think I guess moving forward, if the Public Service Commission is based off of the technical conference, if the commission is looking at changing the rules to kind of address some of these redundancies and that, because by no means are we trying to get out of not providing this type of reporting. We just think that it should be provided to the body that's closest to our customer owners, and because that's really who it's going to be impacting is our customer owners.
And I'm sorry, I came in a little bit late, so I don't know what was said before I got here, but I think part of it seems to me from my conversation I had with Jeff. Again, we all look up at the magical voice in the sky when we do. There was some confusion when the rule came into being that required y'all to report. I think there was some confusion because of the way that provision got into the rule, if I recollect correctly. And so one of the questions is how, I mean no disrespect to anybody, but how that provision came to be in the rule, how widely disseminated that information was, and whether it ought to remain that way, right? And if there's not a gap, does it make sense to have y'all reporting at all, or to refine what ought to be reported? And I think that was most of what Jeff and I spoke about. But there's a lot going on, so I may misrecollect some of that as well. So, and from the division's perspective, we don't want reports just for reports, and that's what Abden Nasser was getting at, is that if there's valuable information we ought to be getting to fill in gaps, then we think it makes sense, and if not, then let's not just have y'all filing paperwork for no good reason.
And one thing that Nathaniel pointed out that I had not really thought about in context of these two rules is, since these rules were implemented, the legislature passed some legislation clarifying our lack of jurisdiction over the ones that are that are not headquartered in the state of Utah.
Yes.
So, again, there's not a ton of clarity on the reason these rules were written the way they were written, but since they were, that change
Yeah.
impacts this whole conversation.
I think so, and it's, it's always the whole Public Utilities Code is somewhat of an uncomfortable fit with the co-ops, just because it's this sort of hybrid, right? We recognize you have this independent governance structure that is, the main home for accountability to the public. But we're still gonna have these few other little, arms into it for these varied purposes, and it's always a bit of an uncomfortable fit. So we've tried to maintain a pretty cooperative working relationship and keeping our people connected informally with the co-ops. But stuff like this can kind of get lost in the cushions.
So we're digging for quarters, and it sounds like we're not finding any.
It usually ends up being a penny, not a quarter.
Or a token from the arc.
That's right.
That's right.
Defunct art.
Well, in terms of wrapping this up, then I think we've had a good discussion. I think we've got an internal decision to make, which then when we make, we'll obviously let everybody know.
Yeah.
Is that a fair summary of where
great.
things are?
Yeah,
People would have a comment period.
No matter what we do, there'll be a comment period, yes.
sure.
If something comes to mind, you'll have a chance. But yeah,
I
sounds
think
good.
we're good.
But if there's any other questions or anything, this is the chance when we're all in the same room. So I don't mean to cut that off.
No, I just, again, I appreciate being new and coming in, right, trying to figure this out. I appreciate kind of the practice of getting my feet wet on it, but then also conversations with public utilities and then each of you, and just reiterate the material itself that's in the reports. We're absolutely happy to provide that report, that information, and just at the level closest to our consumer owners. But yeah, appreciate you all.
You may be new, but I think now you've probably been here as much as Jeff was in the last 8 years or so.
I'm going to get after him. He had another meeting come up today. He's going to join me. He's like, you got this, Nathaniel. So
You guys know Jeff or his dad, right?
Both, yeah.
Both, yeah. Got a long history there.
yeah, they asked me when I first started the job, any relationship to the Petersons?
That'd be in the family.
Yeah. Jeff did try setting me up with his sister at one point, but
Should we shut off the stream?
Yeah.
Are we-
that's
Off the record.
off the record.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and end the technical conference then?
Yeah.